What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over mistakes that could be costing you games in Fortnite Chapter 4. So typically I talk about things you should be doing or things that I think are good to do, but in this video I'm going to talk about things that are bad and things that you probably don't want to do. And if you find yourself doing several of these things or many things over the course of playing Fortnite, just fixing some of these mistakes could go a long way in helping you win more in Fortnite Chapter 4. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful or informative, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below which mistake you think has cost you the most games so far in Fortnite. So the first mistake I'm going to talk about is something that I feel like a lot of players might not view as a mistake because they view it as something that's kind of out of their control, and that is not getting a hammer or a shockwave bow. So the shockwave hammer spawns around the map. You can get it just from looting chests, you can get it from capturing POIs, you can get it from oathbound chests, and you can get it from supply drops as well. There's also an NPC in the near the middle of the map that sells it. So there's lots of ways to get this. The most common way a lot of players get it is by landing at an area with an oathbound chest, and then the shockwave bow you can get from an augment, which gives you it. And whenever I've talked about this on stream, players have been like, no, I'm just unlucky, that's why I'm not getting the hammer. But if you find yourself playing many games and you just consistently don't have a hammer, you're either not exposing yourself to enough loot, you're not landing at an area where there's like oathbound chests, you're not landing near enough to where like the shockwave hammer NPC is. Either way, there's things that you can do, there's things that you control that can reduce how much this RNG actually affects your game. So if you find yourself never getting it, maybe consider changing up your drop spot, learning where some of the oathbound chests are, where the NPCs that sells it is, etc. I'll have a link down in the description below to fortnite.gg. This is a website where you can look at the map. You can enable all the chests, you can enable the oathbound chests, you can see what all the NPCs sell, and you can see where these things spawn in the map. So if you're landing at an area where there's no oathbound chests or just not enough loot, then changing that could help you do a lot better in Chapter 4, because this season is very mobility centric. You can win games without the hammer, but using the hammer and having the hammer in your inventory or the shockwave bow makes the game so much easier. Speaking of that mobility, I think another big mistake I see a lot of players making, or I've seen players kind of make against me when playing the game, is a 50-50 somebody without early tags. So if they just see me running or something and then they just hammer onto me without getting early damage at all or knowing anything about my situation. It's one thing if you just saw this person fighting somebody and you're going to third party it, that's a bit different because you can kind of assume that player's weak at that point. But if you have a full HP opponent and you're a full HP, you want to get those early AR tags, especially with the red eye assault rifle, which hits for like 30 to 40 body shot and like upwards of 60 damage to the head. Just a few of those tags can make the fight much easier. And even if you get first shot on somebody, I feel like 50-50ing somebody is pretty not great this season because of how hard the shotguns hit. Even the white thunder shotgun can hit for 170 damage. So it's pretty hard to win fights this season without taking a huge amount of damage, unless you have that early damage going into the fight, and just makes the opponent much easier. I think in general, most fights you want to have early tags on the opponent. It just makes your life much easier, and it also makes it easier to end the fight quickly, which is going to be the next mistake I see a lot of players making, is they don't end fights fast enough. And this is really detrimental because of the first point I talked about, how mobility centric this season is, and the map is actually much smaller this chapter than previous Fortnite maps. So it is very common and very easy to get third-partied this season. So if you are consistently just letting fights go long and playing them as slow as possible and not kind of capitalizing and not being decisive on that early damage you have, letting the fight go longer and draw out is just going to increase your chances of getting third-partied. And I talked earlier about how hard these weapons hit. Like, just getting third-partied can spell the end of your game super easily. Anybody who plays BRs knows how annoying it is to get third-partied. The next mistake, this is more of like a since we're on the new map type of mistake I see a lot of players making, myself included in the past, is that they don't learn multiple POIs. The map is new, and personally, this is just my perspective, I feel like you want to try out and try to learn as many different POIs as possible, because I feel like the POIs you learn early on in the chapter are just going to be the places you land for the entirety of the chapter. Like last chapter, I never really went to Bugle, I never really went to Condo Canyon, I never really went to Logjam, and because I didn't really go to those places early on in the chapter, I just never learned them and never really went to them. So I feel like try out as many of the POIs as possible, see which ones you like and don't like. Try to like as many of them as you can, because I feel like having multiple drop spots definitely does make the game a lot more enjoyable. And I think this was a huge mistake I made in Chapter 2, where I just didn't learn enough of the POIs early on, and I kind of developed the habit of just never going there. And that just made me really dislike that map more and more over time. The next kind of mistake I've seen a lot of people making is that they avoid using the Thunder Pump. So last chapter, especially for zero build, a lot of players just ran the auto shoddy or the drum shoddy when it was in the game the entire time because of how good these high fire rate shotguns were. But I feel like this season is very much pump favored. Like if you were to compare the Thunder Pump and the Maven shotgun, as of the time I'm recording this video, the Thunder Pump is a much better shotgun. The white one can hit for 170 upwards. The gold one can hit for 195. And the biggest criticism I've seen players making of this weapon whenever I've talked about this, like they leave comments on my videos, is how slow the Thunder shotgun shoots. And I feel like that is just a clear misunderstanding of how you're supposed to use this weapon. So typically, especially in zero build, with the pump shotgun, you want to pump, swap to your spray weapon, spray out a few shots, and then swap back to the pump. If you find yourself pumping and then just sitting there and looking at the opponent while they're shooting you during your pump animation, you were doing it wrong. Pretty much the only time I wouldn't swap weapons is if I was like kind of jiggle peeking cover and just kind of throwing the shots out there. Or maybe I was like jiggle peeking a mountain looking down on somebody, like kind of like a hill area. Then sure, maybe you don't need to like swap then. But like that situation I outlined, if you find yourself pumping, sitting there looking at the opponent while your character is doing the pump animation and then waiting for that second shot, that is not how you want to use the pump shotgun. And just based on the comments I've seen whenever I've talked about this, I think that is genuinely what some people are doing. So you want to fill the time between pump shots with fire from your spray weapon and then swap back to the shotgun, and that maximizes your damage output in a fight. And then in build mode, you want to build immediately after shooting your shotgun, or edit on somebody, shoot, and then reset the edits. But you don't want to just sit there and look at them during the pump animation. Another thing that I've kind of started to do myself is that when someone tries to hammer onto you, you want to hammer off to the side or just away from them to cover, because a lot of people are going to go and then hammer onto you and try to melee you with their hammer. And that makes the situation very awkward, I think, because you take a lot of damage and then you get flung somewhere. So personally, I think if someone's trying to get on you to hammer you or just barrel stuff you in some way, hammer off to the side. Don't let them get the engagement they want, and you'll get more shots on them and play safer in the long run. This is exactly how I approached the game when the Nimbus Cloud was in the game. If somebody was trying to Nimbus onto me, I would just either shockwave away or Nimbus myself, and countering their mobility with your mobility often puts them in an awkward spot, and they don't really know what they want to do at that point in time. Another big mistake I see a lot of players doing is that they just kind of stand there and fight, and they aren't annoying to fight. If you find yourself just standing out in the open, no cover, not strafing side to side, not crouch spamming, you're making yourself a very easy target for opposing players, and you want to be as annoying to fight as possible for the opposing players. So when you fight somebody and you find them hard to hit, if their strafe, them moving their character, is awkward for you to track, try to find out how you can emulate that sort of thing. And then also hitting your crouch button repetitively can help with this sort of thing, and like kind of close to medium range spray fights. Also jumping and shotgun fights, just whatever you find difficult to deal with, try to incorporate that and emulate that into your own playstyle, because I think that is just a big thing that kind of separates kind of below average players and average players, is just how they approach fights. People that aren't really comfortable with the game tend to just kind of stand there, even if it's out in the open, and fight. But you want to make yourself super annoying to fight. How you move in a fight and throwing off your opponent's aim is almost just as important as the damage you do to them yourself. Not being decisive, I think, is another thing that newer players struggle with. And this is something that, like, when I make my spectating videos, it physically pains me. But oftentimes in this game, there are certainly right and wrong plays, but even if you make the right play but you don't commit to it right away, it doesn't really matter. The play that you commit to and whatever you decide to do is much better than kind of half doing several different decisions and not really making up your mind. I feel like being decisive is super important in every video game I've played, and even if you make the wrong play, if you commit to it well, sometimes it can work out, because at the end of the day, Fortnite is not like the most difficult game strategically. There is a large amount of mechanical skill that comes into play, and with things like the shockwave hammer and the shockwave bow, good positioning doesn't really mean that much anymore. It's very easy to force people out of areas or kind of close the gap on people. So being decisive, I think, is super important. Another thing that is a small thing that can go a long way is people not healing over the course of the fight. I have this mistake myself sometimes, or I did in the past for sure, and that is they don't want to use their heals until the fight is over. But if you have time to heal in a fight, this can, not only is it going to give you more HP, and that's going to be good for you because then you're going to be less likely to die, but it can really throw your opponents off. If you and the opponent both kind of trade AR tags, but you have like chug splashes or shield fish in your inventory, and you can heal really quickly without wasting much time doing so, that gives you a huge advantage in the fight, because if they're carrying something like big pots, they don't have that luxury to like pop the heals in the middle of the fight. And that's why fast heals are so important in this game, so you can get them off in a fight without really losing much pressure. And healing over the course of the fight is another thing that I feel like kind of separates below average and average players from people who are more, successful in game. Healing during the fight, if you have the fast heals and if you have the time to, can be the difference maker in winning or losing a game. Another thing that I feel like newer players struggle with, or people that kind of get nervous in a fight struggle with, is like the moment they see somebody, they kind of panic and shoot. And sometimes if you and an opponent see each other at the same time, you just got to do that. But if you happen upon somebody that doesn't know you're there, and they're kind of like walking around and they're about to walk into an open area, you want to let them walk into that open area before you start shooting them. Or maybe they stop to like loot something or stop to pick up heals, whatever. If they're going to make themselves an easier target for you and they don't know you're there, you might as well wait for them to do that. And this is also really helpful in team game modes, because if you and your teammates kind of coordinate, count down like 3, 2, 1 on which person you're going to shoot, and then you all beam the same person, you can get that kill super quick. And this is something you see more advanced teams doing a lot, and it's so much easier to play a fight when you already have a numbers advantage going into it. Another mistake that this is every game that I've ever played is people that get too tunnel visioned on a kill and chasing too much. So when you do damage to somebody and you're only focused on that person, and you kind of forget the surroundings, or if you have somebody running from you, and this is going to happen a lot this season because of how common the shockwave hammer is. If you get someone like you break their shield and then they're just full hammering away, and you want to get that kill, so you end up hammer chasing them into a situation where you really don't know what's going on. I myself do this a bunch because I really want that kill. But what this does is you're chasing them into a situation where you really don't know what you're pushing into. They're probably going to get into a bush or off to a weird angle and try to like get damage on you that way. But also, even if you do end up chasing them and getting the kill, you used your hammer charges to do so, and that leaves you more vulnerable to third parties. And, this season is very third party centric because of how much mobility there is, how much smaller the map is, how common it is for people to drag out fights by running away with the hammer. More often than not, it's better for you just to let that person leave and then kind of don't open yourself up to potentially getting third-partied with no hammer charges. And then the final mistake that I know a lot of players make in this game and every BR is that they don't fight other players because they really want to win. And obviously, if all you want to do is get a win, it's easier to do so if you play super passive. But if you don't get experience fighting, it's going to be hard for you to actually improve in-game and start to win more, especially because I feel like a lot of players who don't fight and aren't experienced fighting, they get super nervous in a fight. And when you're already in an in-game situation, most people are going to be nervous, right? And if you're nervous in-game and you're nervous fighting the last player, that's just not going to be a good recipe for success. So if you get into a lot of fights and you get comfortable fighting, it makes the game so much easier to play. You're not going to be panicking as much in these situations. You're not going to be as overwhelmed in these situations. It's going to be much easier for you to focus on the fight, do what needs to be done, and then get the win. So I would recommend trying to play a bit more aggressive if you find yourself playing super passive, or you can just play a lot of the mini creative deathmatch modes where you can fight. Creative is a really good way to practice, and you can get in so many more reps in a much smaller time span in creative. So I think creative is the best way to improve and the best way to get comfortable fighting in Fortnite. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found it helpful and informative. Like I said, if you did, give it a like, subscribe, and let me know down in the comments below which mistake you feel like you've been making the most in Chapter 4.